My name is Lee Steele. I'm so excited to talk today about my application for the SSI Fellowship for next year, titled Studios to Servers Connecting Creative Computation to Sustainable Software. Who am I professionally? I'm a researcher, facilitator, and an artist. I've spent the past 5 years learning, then facilitating, then creating, really within this kind of open ecosystem, as I would more broadly call it. I first approached different communities as a researcher, working with groups like the Internet Society and the Open Knowledge Foundation and OpenStreetMap in order to learn and understand the kind of invisible and underlying infrastructure behind how technology is made. And that ranges from open source software to internet infrastructure broadly. And it was in these spaces that I learned about, the politics of these projects, what keeps them together, what breaks them apart. And that brought me kind of into becoming a facilitator of these same spaces where I've become and was the community manager of the Turing Way project, previously based at the Alan Turing Institute. I became a facilitator of mapathons through the Missing Maps projects and the British Red Cross, a mentor for OLS. I've even come to spaces like the collaborations workshop in previous years, as well as became a organizer of the FOSDEM Open Research Room. And it was really in these spaces as a facilitator that I learned not only how to apply this kind of uh, theoretical knowledge about how these communities are sustained and maintained, but also how to kind of bring them closer together, how to maintain communities of practice, how to gather together different types of expertise and turn them into outcomes. And as a part of that process, I found myself turning more towards artist-run schools and artistic practice, places like the School for Poetic Computation or the School of Machines Making and Make-Believe, to really find different approaches and ways of thinking and imagining that went beyond the academic paper to new and perhaps more different mediums. And it was really with this desire to connect these different parts of myself, but also different approaches to technology that brought me to develop this fellowship proposal, to really kind of connect research to facilitation to art, to create a kind of community of practice around these different themes. So, briefly, of course, what do I do? That translates into organizing third spaces, supporting this invisible work, all sorts of governance and internal organizing, but also facilitating creativity, connecting across this ecosystem, and of course, making more art. So I'm proposing for my SSI fellowship to connect computational and AI artists to best practices in sustainable software, and really to enable kind of knowledge exchange between RCs and these artists to facilitate shared spaces for exchange and learning, collaboration. And you might be wondering, of course, what is computational art? And I would broadly define that as computing that is used to create installations, performances, and artwork, more broadly. And there are a couple of examples of what this could look like. So on one hand, there's the Algo Rave, developed in Sheffield by Alex McLean. Really interesting and beautiful use of code to live create music and visuals. They take over all sorts of different venues and have actually become a kind of global network of these algorithmic raves that have folks kind of using technology live in front of you to create immersive experiences. Along similar lines, there's the ZZ Show, which actually came through the Alan Turing Institute to AI UK in 2023, developed by the artist Jake Elwes, which is a kind of AI drag cabaret that uses deep fake performers, and it explores gender and identity, technology, and it's also an interactive performance that blends AI and interesting art to kind of reclaim and reuse this technology in a really interesting, subversive way. And along similar lines, you have Joanna Chakow's work, who's a choreographer and an algorithmic researcher. And she, in her work, kind of explores this intersection between the two, where you have the structuring of choreography for bodies kind of being very similar to how algorithms structure our experiences online, really creating kind of embodied workshops that help us to understand these very complex notions in a more embodied way. And these are just a couple of examples. There are plenty more. So it's important to connect these communities, I think, because on one hand, media and digital first artists, they might use code, but they aren't actually usually trained in best practices. They might be creating things in a one-off kind of way for a one-off purpose. And computational AI artists, on the other hand, are very much at the forefront of using and deploying emerging technologies. And these two groups that are often, you know, very separate from academic researchers. They're separated institutionally, technically, and personally. And by bringing in these kind of folks that are using these technology but may not have these best practices, but are also kind of at the forefront, we can find new ways of exploring what usability might look like, new use cases, all sorts of different applications that we might not be able to find otherwise. So, how will this work? So, over the course of a little more than a year, I'll aim to start with a series of surveys that kind of gauge needs and then kind of start to bring artists and researchers, research software engineers together in different places, bringing them into the collaborations workshop, as well as organizing a small creative computing festival that invites RCs to participate in interesting ways. And then this will kind of culminate in seeding a community of practice where there are findings, feedback, outcomes, and things that are disseminated later on into the year, ultimately with the goal of developing a community of practice.